Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Max Yortzberg. I'm the Managing Director of Park County Environmental Council. PCEC is your local community organization working to protect the lands, water, wildlife, and people of Yellowstone's Northern Gateway. Just a couple bits of housekeeping before we kick it off. The presentation is being recorded, as you know, so we can share it with people who aren't able to join us today. Please remember to mute your microphone throughout the presentation. There will be some time after Jeanette's presentation for a little question and answer period and discussion. Feel free to come off mute then if you want to ask a question. You're also welcome to drop comments or questions into the chat window throughout the presentation, and we will get to them at the end as well. So this is our third in a series of water resource related community conversations. The previous presentations were on snowpack and how we measure that and monitor that and study it. And then most recently, the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group's river recreation study. Both of those were recorded. You can find them on our website or YouTube channel if you'd like to watch those and learn about those topics. And we have one more coming up with John Lunsner, hydrologist with the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. He will be presenting Water in Balance, the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Study. It will focus on his comprehensive hydrology study of the Upper Yellowstone. John's study, in essence, has allowed him to calculate how much water enters the system, as well as how much is taken out via human use or naturally through evaporation or just seepage and loss. The data he has collected is complex and it's invaluable, and it's really broadening our understanding of the Upper Yellowstone watershed. And also, I think this will be the first time he's presented on the study publicly since its completion at the end of the last year with all the data. So hopefully we'll be hearing about some conclusions and analysis he's been able to do with the data. That will take place on Monday, not Monday, May 21st, Wednesday, May 21st at noon. So next month. A couple other upcoming events I'd like to let you all be aware of. Earth Week is next week, as well as Earth Day, and PCEC is teaming up with the some local youth, the Park High Green Initiative. In particular, there will be a community hike led by a member of the Green Initiative. Date, time, location, all of that TBD, and it'll be weather dependent. So we will get more information out on that. Stay tuned for that. The Green Initiative has also has some Earth Day challenges that you're all welcome to participate in. Some of them are wearing sustainable fashion or eating a plant-based diet or leading a zero waste lifestyle. All of this is just to promote conscious choices within our community. And then the National Honor Society and Green Initiative are going to be doing a day of service on April 25th. They're going to be planting some trees by the high school, doing cleanup around the parks and on Fleshman Creek, working in the farm to school community garden, and just assisting other local organizations. So keep an eye out for them doing that. And then also, I want to let you know about Montana Freshwater Partners Native Plant Sale, May 10th. 1:30 at the Park County Fairgrounds. They just concluded their online ordering for the plant sale, but you can go pick up plants in person that day if you missed the pre-order. This is a fantastic way to enhance your backyard and contribute to pollinator health and just habitat in general in the area. Okay, so now let's talk about the river and today's presentation. The Yellowstone, it's often heralded as the longest undammed river in the lower 48. It's a fantastic distinction and one I'd like to delve into a little bit more. Why is that such an honor? What does it truly mean? Well, for me, in the most basic sense, it means that there's no check on the river. And when high water comes each spring, and with that, comes the need for the river to move. And anyone who's spent any significant time on the Yellowstone has seen it change, sometimes gradually, like I have when certain side channels that were my favorite fishing haunts have slowly become the main channel. And there are other times when the river changed all at once, like June of 2022, when we saw a 500-year flood arrive literally overnight. I like to think that the river is alive. It is a living thing. and its physical presence is dynamic. And without a dam to regulate it, it can flow and live freely throughout its entire course, the 672 odd miles that it flows through Montana. And if you ask me, it's up to us to learn to live with the river rather than the other way around. Um, and in many ways, I think that's what our guest presenter, Jeannette Blank, is here to speak to us about today. But she might be a little less philosophical on that matter. Jeannette is here to talk about mapping the Yellowstone River's channel migration. In 2023, Park County was awarded a grant from the DNRC to update the 2009 Yellowstone Channel migration map in Park County. The mapping updates were completed in 2024. Montana Freshwater Partners had teamed with DTM Consulting and Applied Geomorphology to do the updated map as both DTM and Applied Geomorphology worked on the original map. Today, you'll learn about channel migration concepts and how the map was developed and how to access the online mapping tool and how to interpret features in the map. It's important to note this is a non-regulatory planning tool, and it is considered the best available information that can be used by city and county leadership as well as private landowners to make informed decisions about future investments and development along the Yellowstone River. And here today to present that is Jeannette. I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with Jeannette for over 20 years now. I'm excited to hear this presentation from her. Jeannette is the In-Lieu Fee Mitigation Program Director for Montana Freshwater Partners and a longtime Livingston resident with over 20 years experience in water resource restoration, permitting, and regulatory expertise. So without further ado, Jeannette, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Max. Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your day to get a review of this map that's available. So let's see. Max already covered my first couple of slides, updated to the 2024 map. Tony Thatcher, Karen Boyd did the legwork on all of the mapping, and I, just being the local person, am here to convey the message out to everyone and get folks to start using this map to support your decisions on your property. So I just want to acknowledge that this was a project that was funded through a DNRC grant that was awarded to Park County. All right, map was developed in 2024, and now we have spent some time presenting that map. So I wanted to first kind of go through some basic concepts. We'll review how channel migration impacts landowners, the city, the county, things that are the downside of channel migration, but also touch upon as well the essential parts of channel migration in terms of the health of the river. Then we'll go into the basics of the mapping itself so that we can see what features are in the map. And then I'll show you how to actually access that map and some other materials online so that you can kind of dig around and learn more about it. So first of all, channel migration, this is a specific type of river hazard. Just like flooding is, channel migration is another big hazard, but much less known and not talked about mostly in the mainstream. It is a non-regulatory map. This is one of the reasons why we wanted to do this map, is to capture the updates after the 2022 flood, but also to provide something that's non-regulatory for everybody to use. So by having this map available along the Yellowstone, it doesn't trigger new regulations. It's not tied to any existing regulations. It's really just a planning tool. It's different from floodplain mapping, and we'll touch on that. It's based on pretty simple, well-established methodology. It's really just a map that has illustrating where the river has been over time using historical aerial images, and then estimating where it's going to be based on that rate of change over time. Super cost effective to generate these maps, and it can be used by our city leadership, our boards, landowners, water resource professionals alike. Anybody can use this to help make better decisions or more informed decisions about your property, right? So the difference between floodplain mapping and channel migration mapping. Floodplain mapping versus regulatory, right? We have regulated floodplain maps, and those maps essentially tell us where the river, where that water is going to go and how deep it's going to be. So it's going to tell you where you're going to get wet during a flood event, right? Channel migration maps, non-regulatory, and they're really just focused on that lateral movement of the river. Where is the river? Where has the river moved? And where is it likely going to move in the future? And this is critical because this is channel migration is what really creates those dramatic wipeout scenes that we see with houses falling in the river or bridges or utilities and things like that. This is an example of what a channel migration map looks like. Our map for the Yellowstone doesn't look like this. This is actually the image on the left side of the screen is of the Mississippi. So this is just showing where the Mississippi has been over time and how the river has moved laterally over time. But really, it's just as simple as measuring out these bank lines. So if the upper right-hand corner, you're to measure out this bank line using aerial imagery, and then do that for multiple years over time. And you see in the lower right-hand corner, this is basically the basic elements of a channel migration map, seeing where that river has been over the course of time. So what are the risks of channel migration? The big risks is that there are those big like erosion and avulsion hazards. It's impacting our homes, our roads, our bridges, utilities, diversion structure. It creates a lot of loss of property when we invest dollars into infrastructure that we want to replace, but it's located in the channel migration zone, right? So lots of loss of property. Hopefully this doesn't create too many horrible flashbacks. There's a lot of horrible experiences that happened from the 2022 flood, but the difference is on those two images on the right-hand side, that's flooding, right? The images on the left-hand side, that's example of channel migration, right? So if I click up again to the difference between channel migration, right? Here's that house getting wiped out. The brown house that we're all familiar with up in Gardner. And then upper left-hand corner, there's that house floating down the river, right? So this house was not in the floodplain. It didn't actually get wet from floodwaters inundating it, but it got wiped out because of channel migration. That main stem of the river moved underneath that house's foundation. And the same thing in the lower left corner, this is Rock Creek, same flood event in Red Lodge, where this is an area that took out the roads and the home because of that channel migration. We also had a lot of loss of bridges. A lot of chaos happened from that river. So we have these impacts. We also are having larger events more frequently, and this is for a variety of reasons, but this is the Yellowstone River flood history. This is the only chart I'm going to show you today, but this is pulled just from from Carter's Bridge, right? So just upstream of Livingston. And so we're seeing these larger events. They're starting to stack up, over the last 28 to 30 years. And so just to point out that just 7 of the last 10 plus year events have happened in the last 28 years. So this is kind of my plug, just to remind folks that when we're talking about a 10-year or a 100-year or a 500-year flood event, we aren't talking about like a 100-year event only happening every 100 years, right? It's actually a probability. So when we're talking about a 100-year event, we're actually saying we have a 1 in 100 chance every year, or a 1% chance of having a 100-year event every year. A 500-year event, we have a 1 in 500 chance, or a 0.02% chance each year of having a 500-year event. So that's how that is intended that term is used to describe. Okay. All right, moving on. That's my soapbox. Okay. So we see the hazards, right? We know the hazards firsthand, many of us, of channel migration, but it's also really critical to allow that unimpeded movement of the river in order to maintain the health and stability of a dynamic river like Yellowstone. And it sounds funny to say stability of a dynamic river, but it's really about like we need these really important processes to continue. That's sort of the stability of it in order to create like that regeneration of a dynamic river, that it has to happen in order to maintain the health. So a couple of examples of that. So migration coupled with flooding scours out our banks, right? Creates those open bars. That's the opportunity to recolonize, for vegetation to recolonize those bars, those point bars. So we start getting different age classes of vegetation, right? Think of it like our floodplain riparian vegetation has evolved to require just regular disturbance in order to regenerate. It's kind of similar to like our forest. Our forests have evolved to need that natural fire regime, right, to create that disturbance to regenerate. Some of those pine trees or spruce trees need fire in order to have their cones split open and then start to germinate new plants. It's kind of the same thing with floodplain vegetation. It needs that disturbance if we're going to have things regenerate and evolve over time, right? And so, and streamside vegetation, that's like our biggest bang for the buck when it comes to streamside for bank stabilization over time. Channel migration, that movement of the channel, also creates erosion, obviously. That erosion can be really beneficial because it recruits new gravels into the system, right? Fresh gravels creates really great bedding sites for, holy cow, I just forgot the word for fish mating. Reds and things like that. Okay. Okay, so for laying eggs, and they need that fresh gravel for that type for that function. Erosion and migration also helps to bring in a lot of new woody debris recruitment. So woody debris, super beneficial to rack up against islands or banks. That creates additional stability, but it's also providing shade, underwater complexity for fish habitat. It's also a surface that nutrients and insects can be on, which feeds the food web within the aquatic habitat. So super important to allow this to happen. If we don't, we start losing our riparian vegetation. When we lose our riparian vegetation, we lose shading, our temperature increases, our water quality goes down. So it all feeds into each other for various services and important aspects of the river that we not only enjoy, but our local economies, our ag economy depends on good, clean water, you know, and certainly our tourism industry as well. But we have these two competing forces, right? Our, Paradise Valley has become a hugely popular area for people to move to develop. People want to be close to the river, right? But they're doing it also because they love the river so much and want to be a part of that. So we have these competing balances, factors, and whether we can strike a balance is a good question, right? So we can think of rivers as being managed either as channels, right, or as corridors. The positive sides of a channel is like you're necking that river down, you're really controlling it so they can really maximize development or the use on the outside of that river, right? And how it's done is you're building up, you're armoring that river. So dikes, levees, riprap, point bars, all these different engineered hardened structures are used to really confine that river. The big downside of that obviously is, well, you lose a lot of the you lose the functional capacity of the river. So it's no longer, supporting fish, wildlife, clean water, that sort of thing. But also what ends up happening hydrologically is when you constrain a river and force it down into a smaller area, it actually drives up the velocity of the water, which then increases the erosive force on the bed and banks, which then increases impacts and costs. So it's this negative feedback cycle. The more you narrow a river, that flow gets constrained, it drives up velocity, increases erosive force, causes the need for more armoring, more money, and we go on and on. if we are able to allow our rivers to have a wider corridor to move through during those flood events or those high flow events, that river has room to move. It has room, more area to spread out that flow that reduces the velocity, it reduces the erosive force, and it reduces the impact. So think of it, a very simple analogy to this is like when you're washing your car in your driveway using your garden hose. You turn on the water, you got flow coming out of the end of your garden hose. What do you do when you want to really spray something off your car? You put your thumb over the end of the hose, right? And that shoots the water out faster, and you have that erosive force you need to blast off the sediment on your car, right? So it's the same concept. If we are constraining the river with riprap and armor, we're effectively putting our thumb over the edge of that hose and increasing that velocity and then increasing the erosive force. So we're seeing that quite a bit. And if we bring that analogy to the Yellowstone, we had a lot of studies after the back-to-back floods that happened in the late 90s, and we had the cumulative effects analysis, or mid-90s and cumulative effects analysis that came out later. In 2001, there was 23.1 miles of armor, like riprap, dikes, levees, point bars, things like that. 23.1 miles of armor along the upper Yellowstone, which is our section in Park County. And since then, as of 2023, we've added nearly 8.5 more miles of armor, of hard armor, to our section of river. And Park County now has, through the Yellowstone, now has the highest concentration of dikes and levees on the entire length of the Yellowstone. And Max had noted that entire length is what, about 650 some odd miles. Our county has the highest concentration per mile of dikes and levees. So we are trending towards that constrained condition, right, that we are talking about, which drives up velocity, increases force, which drives up our costs, right? But when we have a flood, right, it's like it's really natural for anybody, whether that's the city or the county or an individual property owner, you want to protect your property, you want to protect your investment. And what's starting to happen, what we're starting to see more often, unfortunately, upstream, well, everywhere, but this is an example of a property that's upstream in the valley, is as these larger properties are getting subdivided, right, into smaller parcels, people are excited about, they love the river, they're building closer to the river, not knowing that they're in the channel migration zone. They riprap along their parcel line. And what's up happening is we're starting to see this riprap thinking, you know, this is good protection for my property. It's actually creating kind of a false sense of security, because we're starting to see accelerated erosion on the upstream and downstream side of this bank armoring, right? So this creates a really puts this property owner at a lot of risk, right? Because if they don't own property upstream of this, you know, they're not only impacting their neighbor's property, but there's not a lot that they can do about that to keep this from eroding further. And what ends up happening here is that this is another example up in the valley where the property owner put a lot of money into this riprap. It's expensive, right? And to protect their bank, well, there was some flanking that happened, and then after the 2022 flood, the river ripped behind it. So now this bank armor has failed. And under an extreme scenario, this is lower on the Yellowstone down by Park City, but this is an example of a, you know, really failed riprap where landowner put a lot of money into this to protect their property. The river continued to erode behind it, and now, you know, they still had a ton of erosion and lost a ton of money into this investment of riprap. And then to, you know, insult to injury, they also technically need to pay to get this riprap out of the river at this point. So it's super expensive. Certainly there are times when, you know, there's just critical infrastructure that has to be protected. There's really no other option. But when it comes to property owners that may be able to avoid this scenario ahead of time, that's an ideal application of this channel migration zone map, is to understand what are my risks, how do I avoid it so that I don't get into a situation, that this landowner could potentially be in where, they have no other, they can't really do much else. The river might flank behind here, and now they've got the river running up right against their structure. And at that point, there's not a lot that can be done besides moving the structure, which is super expensive. And we saw a couple instances of that from the 2022 flood. So let's go to the migration map and see how it was developed, and then maybe some other applications on how to use it. Okay, so let's see how my time is doing. I'm doing pretty good. All right, so here we go. We're just going to run through the basic features that you're going to see in the map. So on the channel migration map, we identify where the river has been. So we use historical aerial images, we map the bank lines, and then we go to the subsequent years. And everywhere where that river has occupied from basically the 1940s until 2023 is included in that historic channel migration zone. So this is where the river can move back and forth throughout time and where it can move back and forth into the future. We also wanted to understand, okay, so we know the river, you can see while you're mapping these rivers, this is where the river is heading east on this bank for, over time. So we can measure out what is that average annual rate of migration over time. We multiplied it by 100 and then applied that to the bank line that the river is heading towards. And so that was what we called the erosion hazard area. So it basically gives people a sense of like, hey, this is where the river seems to be migrating towards. And this is a buffer, if you will, to just buy yourself some time. It might take 100 years if the river moves at the exact same rate over time, but we know rivers don't move at the exact same rate over time. So best to, you may last you for a long time, could get wiped out in one or two future big events, but it just gives you a buffer there to start thinking about. We also mapped out the avulsion potential hazard areas. So avulsions, for those of you that may not be familiar with that term, is when the river takes a sudden shortcut, usually driven by a flood event. So maybe there's an old side channel that hasn't been active for a long time. The river may, because of log jams or other debris jams, may divert its main flow into this old side channel, or it may cut an entirely new channel. That is called an avulsion. So we wanted to highlight and map the areas that are prone to that, which are generally areas that sit relatively low to the river and have some of those old flow paths that go through there. We also, one thing that's new for the upper Yellowstone map is what we called a geotechnical hazard area. And so this is just trying to capture those oversteepened vertical bluffs that are very prone to either just natural erosion, where they're just naturally going to lay back, or additional erosion just from river movement, right? So geotechnical hazards, if you see those, that's generally indicating a steep slope. And we just we applied a 2-to-1 slope to those slopes just to give people a sense of like, hey, this vertical slope is going to want to lay back. So give it some room if you're able to. And then the last thing that's mapped is identifying all the areas of existing bank armoring, like levees, dikes, riprap, things like that. We identified all of those as best as can be captured on aerial imagery, and then just noted the restricted migration area behind that. So it's another feature of the map. So real quickly, how this gets pieced together is this is up by Point of Rocks as an example. This is one of the earlier quality aerials that was used from the 40s. We map out the bank line of the main stem of the river. Okay, and then there's subsequent years after that we map out the bank lines. But then fast forward to 2023, we have really good aerial imagery from post-flood, and we map out that bank line. And then through the magic of GIS, we combine all of that together. So the dark blue, when you see the dark blue on the map, that's that shows where the river has been from like the 1940s until 2023. That's your historic migration zone. Okay, so as we're mapping out that historic migration zone, you're also capturing how much has the river moved between the years of each aerial imagery that's being used. And so we can map out the distance that the river has moved using that imagery, right? So for example, this yellow line is a migration vector. This is where the river has moved from the 40s to 2023. And in this location, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but couple of the yellow lines are showing the river has moved like over 500 feet in basically to the east over the course of from the 1940s to actually pre-2022 flood. So the yellow is showing migration pre-2022 flood, and then we capture the amount of migration that happened during the 22 flood. Whoops. With the red bars. So the red bars show how much the river actually moved just from the 22 flood. And at this location, just below the orange arrows, that is showing the river moved 140 feet just during the 2022 flood. So this was a really active area of the river from that flood. Okay, next. We also took into account bed bank material. So not from a very rigorous sediment transport perspective by any means, but just giving an indication that, bedrock doesn't erode very much, right? And then we have other types of bank material like glacial outwash terrace. Those are the pretty, what used to be very stable banks up by Gardner had the glacial outwash terraces. We had quaternary terraces. Those are going to be like the big, tall bluffs that we see kind of by the Weeping Wall, Emigrant, and then alluvium. So think about like those areas downstream of Emigrant where it's lower elevation and just the river really migrates and moves around in these areas. So those are some of the other factors that were taken into consideration. So when the map gets all put together, this is what it looks like. So this is a snapshot of the map on the Yellowstone. We have that historic migration zone in the dark blue. So this is where the river occupied in the past. The lighter blue area with the dots on it is showing river miles along the current alignment of the river based on the 2023 aerials. The orange is that erosion hazard area. So this is 100 times the average annual migration rate over time. And you can see that orange buffer varies. So if we have a wide buffer, that's an indicator you're probably in that alluvium or more erosive bank material. Narrower erosion buffer areas indicate more erosion resistant material along the bank line, right? The pink areas is that avulsion hazard area. So those are low-lying areas with side channels or historic side channels. Those are identified with those dashed lines. So these are the areas that during a flood event the river could move into or evulse into these areas, right? So this is an additional hazard. The cross-hatched areas are the geotechnical overlay. So if you see one of these, this is just an indicator that you have a high vertical bank, and just being careful to avoid building too close or placing infrastructure too close to that, because it's going to want to lay back naturally anyway. And then the last feature is going to be the existing armor. So triangles, red dots, black and white bars, those are mapping out dikes, levees, riprap, point bars, things like that. Things that are going to hinder channel migration, but doesn't necessarily stop it. And so we've identified the restricted migration behind that. Okay, so that's all the features. And so I thought I'd just kind of touch on a couple areas that we're all familiar with locally, just like how does the map look in these areas? So big area of a lot of discussion in the city anyway is the hospital area, right? So east end of town, this area got pretty hammered from the flood event, right? And this is a really complex area. So this is kind of getting to that point where the river is really channelized, really constrained and constricted through the city stretch, right? Which drives up our costs. And so we have levees, we have a double bridge alignment that constricts the river. That's Veterans Bridge and then the Burlington Northern Bridge there. We have, obviously critical infrastructure where the hospital is located just off to the right of this image. We have flood risks. We've got avulsion, old river swales and things like that through this area. So that's what this area looks like on the channel migration map. We've got, you can see, one of the benefits of the map is you can actually see where most, if not, a good number of all of the armored areas are, so that you can understand, how that might be protecting your property, but could be affecting other areas, where other areas still have access to its floodplain, things like that. The hospital area is obviously a pretty complex area because there is so much constrictions already and a lot of infrastructure, things like that. And so for the channel migration zone map, we ended up calling the hospital area and that whole area around there just as the special hazard area. It is low lying relative to the river. It does have flow pass through it, but there's things that are like the highway and the railroad that block a true avulsion from occurring. There's lots of other factors going on. So the map basically just kind of identifies like, this is kind of a unique area that's got a lot of stuff going on that's going to need some, just takes a lot of other things to take into consideration when we're evaluating the hazard in this area. But there are true avulsion potential areas here, as well as erosion areas, and obviously lots of controlled features. Another way to utilize this map is when new property owners, for example, or existing property owners are looking to build along their properties. And so not just property but owners, but also we're talking city and county where they want to place their infrastructure, the infrastructure that tax dollars pay for. We want to use this map to help inform and make sure that certainly if we're going to be investing taxpayer dollars, let's do it in a place that's outside of the immediate hazard zones of the channel migration zone. So I have this is Carter's Bridge. There's a lot of bank armoring around this area. It's also just like where the river is constricted and then it kind of opens up just downstream of Carter's Bridge. So if we're looking, if we're going from the bottom of the screen up to the top of the screen, that is the flow of the river, right? So we're heading towards Livingston as we move up the screen, excuse me. And one of the ways to think about using this map as another example is thinking in terms of, property. How does a property owner use this map to consider your risks, right? So just pay attention to this property that's outlined in the red and black dashes. This is a low levee that was built around this property a long time ago. We got an avulsion hazard here, and then a lot of riprap, areas that aren't riprap, but lots of erosion hazards here as well. Okay, if we open up the cadastral website, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Montana Cadastral, but this is the website that you can open up to see property parcels and property information. There are a lot of, here's that property that's outlined with the little low levee around it. And this was the areas that was mapped as a avulsion hazard. So notice there's, multiple small parcels that are located in the avulsion hazard area. There are multiple small parcels now that have been subdivided that are located in high erosion risks. And one thing that caught my eye was, there's 3 parcels here that aren't developed. If we flip back up to the erosion, to the channel migration map, there's not much area on these parcels that is outside of the hazard area to build upon. So this is important for these landowners to understand this. The other interesting aspect of this is that a lot of these small parcels are owned by people who don't live here. So these are folks that are out of state that may not be familiar or understand the history and the power of the Yellowstone. So these are things that are important for, a good way that this tool can be used to help people be informed about their risks, so that, when they do build their home, they're investing it in a place that's as far away from that hazard zone as possible. The other way to use this map is to think about what's your cost benefit analysis. I'm kind of a dork, so this is how I think about, risk and how much, okay, if I want to put my structure here, or if I want to keep my structure here, how much is it going to cost me to maintain that riprap or to put in new riprap to protect it? Or, am I going to save money in the long run by building away from this area? So on the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group site, there was a post-flood Yellowstone recovery story map that was developed. And within that, we provided some ideas on like different bank stabilization treatments or bank recovery treatments. One of the things that was included in this was a kind of a decision flow chart. So I'll show you how to access this, but you can start thinking about this like, hey, is it because, I've got a fence line that I just put in, or I'm going to redo a fence line that costs a lot of money. Maybe I can use this map to, place that fence line outside of the erosion hazard zone. Yeah, I might be losing on a little bit grazing area, but over time, I'm going to save money by not having to continually replace this fence over and over and over again, or any kind of infrastructure. So these are some of the tools that are available, and I'll show you how to get to them to help make a decision. But thinking about costs, right? Because there is a cost to building too close, and there is a cost to having to put in that riprap or that armor, which is basically becomes a permanent, expensive maintenance project over time. Other ways that we can use this map, it's about buyer, outreach, buyer beware, things like this type of presentation, education, public comment. If folks are concerned about something that, the city or the county might be doing with taxpayer dollars, like, hey, this is going to be, maybe if we're going to replace this bridge, let's get this bridge to be wide enough so that we're not having to continue to replace it or repair it over time. As far as planning goes, making sure, just checking like maybe somebody wants to put a new septic system. It happens to be in the channel migration zone. Like, hey, let's put this outside of here so that your septic field doesn't wash down the river the next time. It could inform, it doesn't regulate, but it could inform subdivision review. It can inform infrastructure placement. It can inform permits, but it's not going to, it's not a new regulation. It could also be really useful for emergency response. And then also as far as public helping to guide where maybe open space goes and emergency access areas should go, like that's a great way to inform. I think I'm running a little over, but I do want to show you where you can access this map online and all the information that you can get. So if I were to click this link, I'm going to stop share for just a moment and then open up my other screen. See if I'm technically savvy enough to do this. Oopsies. Max, did I just lose the presentation? I don't think I did. Okay. All right, let me open this up. Okay, let me share again. Okay, so if you clicked on that link, so if you were to Google Upper Yellowstone Channel Migration Map, you will pull up, you will see a link to the Montana State Library. Okay, so you click on this link and you're going to get to the Montana Channel Migration Zone page. All right, so you can, there's a whole bunch of other channel migration zone maps that have been completed throughout the state. Once you're here and you're on the 2024 project for the Yellowstone, you can download a project report. So this report's super informative. It's going to give you a lot of background on the river, on certain, concerned areas, how to read the map, all of that stuff. You can download a PDF of your map. You can download all the GIS data that goes into this map. And if you scroll down, you can access the online mapper. So you don't need to have GIS or anything like that to access this map. So I'm going to stop share again. And then I'm going to reshare so you guys can see what that map looks like when you open it up. Let's see if I have that open. I might not have that open, but let's just open it up here directly from here. Okay. Are you guys able to see my screen? Did that zoom into the active mapper, or is it still just showing the website?
I can see it.
Okay. So you can see with all the lines and everything on there. Okay. All right. So here's what the active mapper looks like. In the upper right-hand corner, you can type in your location. So let's just go back to that Carter's Bridge location. So Carter's Bridge, you can see Carter's Bridge fishing access opens up. I can zoom right into it. And here you see all the features right there. So you can zoom in, you could get to your parcel, your property, whatever you're interested in, and access it that way. You've got a legend on the left-hand side of the screen. You can click on content and you can get into the individual layers. So you can click things on and off. However you want to explore this map. So it's all available to you. And I'm going to stop share for just a second and get back to the presentation so that you guys have one other aspect of this. So Tony and myself are always available to answer questions. If you want to print out your map or get into it and have questions, you can always reach out to us and be happy to do that. So you can email me. You could, find me through the Montana Freshwater Partners website. That's freshwaterpartners.org, and you can find me there as well. There's a couple other resources. I mentioned the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group website. If you go onto their website, there is a post-Yellowstone recovery link at the very top, and you open that and you'll get into a really nice story map. It actually covers a lot of channel migration concepts. It talks about permitting, post-flood permitting issues. It kind of touches on different types of bank treatments, alternatives to riprap. And it also includes that decision tree of like, should I stabilize my bank or not? So those are resources that are available to you. And I think so that we have time for a couple questions, I will stop there. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer a few of those while we've got the time.
Yeah, everyone, feel free to come off mute if you want to ask your question, or you could type it into the chat too, if you prefer.
Excuse me, I've got a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, first of all, very nice job, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Both the product and the presentation. I especially like that one sort of critical path slide in terms of determining if you need to stabilize your bank and, how to pursue the right pathway toward an appropriate ending. I think that's really helpful. My question, well, it's two parts. One, part of this effort was to, and along with the technical advisory committee that several of us are on, was to put together a list of priority projects based on a whole bunch of criteria, funding, the availability of funding for a particular project, whether it's based on geography or need or whatever. Yeah. And I'm wondering how you've proceeded with that. Have you been able to secure some funding? That's the first question.
Yeah.
And the second question is, it's hard to predict what the effect of Trump's hatchet job on the economy and universities, how that's going to affect the availability of funding through NRCS or the EPA or, other government agencies like that for,
Mhm.
the kind of projects that need to be done in the Upper Yellowstone.
Yeah. Well, so great questions and comments. So your first question was, yes, thank you for reminding me. So in the report, as part of the report, we identified a list of potential projects. So if you get into the 2024 report, which you can download from that website, or if you're having trouble finding it, you can email me and I can send you a link. We identified, like, up in Gardner saw a lot of change, and it kind of was very stable for a long time. And now that flood ripped out these banks that were stable for many, tens, hundreds of years. And so we identified areas of, like, okay, this is an area that's going to be adjusting a lot over the next however many years as it tries to kind of heal itself from that event. We also identified a number of bridges or areas along 89 that are encroaching on the channel hazard area. The hospital is a big concern area. So there is a potential project list that is included in the report. And as far as going through and really getting a prioritized project list, this is the Upper Yellowstone River Technical Advisory Group, which hasn't been, we haven't met for a while, but that hasn't been tackled yet. But one of the things that was really elevated clear during this whole process was, like, the hospital area is a really big priority. So that is one area that we've pursued funding for. There was a federal grant that did not get awarded. That wasn't from this most recent round of federal funding cuts, but it was the result of a previous federal funding cut. And so that is definitely a priority, is to start looking at, okay, how do we evaluate, like, the channel migration map is informing, provides that information. It provides a kind of an additional story of, like, showing the need to our grant sources to fund projects like understanding and reducing the hazard around the hospital. One of the challenges is with all of the federal funding cuts, that does change the landscape of what we, know as typical funding sources and not. So it's a challenge for sure. There's still lots of hopefully funding routes that are out there, though, to address things like that. Other questions?
Jeanette, Dennis dropped a comment in the chat about riprap and the recent increase in permits for bank armoring, and how that weighs against the lawsuit that was brought against the Army Corps that kind of was to potentially limit that riprap. I don't want if you have any insight on that.
Yeah, and so I know from that lawsuit, I guess the solution or the compromise that was achieved through that was not a complete barring of obviously not barring riprap or additional riprap from going in the river, but they incorporated a special management zone on the Yellowstone, and also which requires additional mitigation. So when you do riprap the river, if you go over a certain threshold of fill below the ordinary high water level, you still have to get a permit. You got to get a couple different types of permits, but the Army Corps regulates fill below the ordinary high water mark. And if your riprap or whatever fill you're placing in there exceeds a certain threshold, which is 0.03 acres, then you're required to do mitigation. And so that's essentially what ends up happening is the permittee, in addition to the cost of their project, they also have to pay for what's called stream credits from an established mitigation bank. And so that is an additional cost on top of that. And if their project occurs within the special management zone of the river, which is the area, is sort of like a little bit above Emigrant, down, I believe, below the city, which is the area where there's the highest concentration of existing riprap and armoring. Then there's a higher multiplier applied to the amount of stream credits that you have to buy in order to offset your impact. The downside of that, in theory, that's great. That's a deterrent. It's cost more money for the permittee. They have to really want it, need it to do it. But the downside of it is that the established mitigation bank is like at a headwaters, miles and miles away from the Yellowstone. So we're actually losing, even though the functions are getting offset at a different locations. The functions that we're losing on the Yellowstone are being offset at a different location. We're still losing, functions like floodplain connectivity and things like that on the main stem.
I'd like to add a quick note on that. The environmental groups that sued the Corps over cumulative effects, that ultimately led to the formation of the Upper Yellowstone Task Force, where I served as staff and did some of the studies. And it's unfortunate, but the single thing that brought the task force folks to the table, they were really unable to agree on a good solid set of recommendations, and if you look at the report, the final report, there's just some lovely flower language, in that part of the report. And the Corps did develop a special area management plan with a certain type of, I forget the details, but they have general permits and specific permits with conditions. But ultimately, I think it's going to be up to the county and others to keep track of, the problem of cumulative effects. If you have a small chunk of bank, you rip wrap, and then somebody a ways downstream rip wraps a small chunk of bank, and then it kind of propagates. And one of the useful things about the CMC study is it should help people to recognize where they can build, where they're not going to have to constrain the river and go through the expense of, a lot of expensive riprap to protect an investment.
True. Well, we're right up at the top of the hour, and I know people probably have to jump to other meetings or work tasks. So I understand if you do that. If anyone has any questions, they'd absolutely really are dying to ask Jeannette regarding this study. We can hang on here for a little bit longer and address those. So I'll leave it open for a bit for anyone else.
I'm going to also, I should have done this earlier, but I'm going to paste into the chat. Here is the Upper Yellowstone 24 CMZ map link there. I will also put into, so that's the link that you can get to that first page where you can download the report, you can download PDFs of the map, you can access the mapper. So you can do and download all the GIS data if you really want to geek out on it. The other link I'm going to share with you is the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group link. And so here is that. If you want to get to that decision matrix, so I'll just put a link here. This is the decision matrix link. So you go to the upperyellowstone.org website. Again, you'll see that 2022 Yellowstone flood recovery link, and then it'll pop up that story map or that kind of presentation slides, and you can scroll down. You'll find that decision matrix in there.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
It's a little bit personal. So I live on the Yellowstone in Gardner. I have 195 feet of river access. And you mentioned high water. Did the high water level change officially as a result of that flood? Or is there some sort of an average high water? Because one side of my property is defined by the high water mark. So did I lose
Yeah.
property in that? I know I lost some riverbank, but the part I lost didn't belong to me, but I'm just wondering if, technically I have less property now.
Ah, gotcha. Yeah, so you're talking about when I mentioned the ordinary high water mark.
Right, right.
Yeah. So that is so the channel migration map doesn't map out ordinary high water mark or anything like that. That
Okay.
is sort of um a point along a bank that it changes over time, but it's basically like you're going to see, like, if you have you might see where vegetation grows above that but not
Right.
below it, or you might see kind of a consistent sediment line there. It's not showing like where the highest water was, it's not showing where the lowest water was. It's just showing like where the water generally hits most consistently during regular flood events. So you might see like the rocks are lighter colored below the ordinary high water mark and
Right.
different colored above it. So it's kind of like one of those things where you are able to identify that and if you're working with a water resource engineer, they're familiar with those terms and they can identify where that is on your property, especially if you're looking at doing a permit or something like that.
Right. I'm actually concerned about being in the flood zone now because high water mark raised. I was only 50, I had to be 50 feet above the high water so that I don't have to get flood insurance.
Yeah.
That high water mark has moved up. I might be in a zone now where I do need it.
Yeah.
I just don't want to point that
So-
out to anybody at the moment.
Right,
I'll
right.
keep that on the down low if you don't mind.
Yeah, and so the DNRC, which is kind of tied up into FEMA. So it's DNRC is our state agency that talks to FEMA, right? And FEMA and DNRC are look at the regulated floodplain maps, right? And all of our floodplain regulations are based on that regulated floodplain map. Right now, based on after the 2022 flood, DNRC initiated doing an update to the regulated flood maps along the main stem of the Yellowstone. And so that's in progress. And so where you're going to be wanting to pay attention to is when that draft map comes out. And so that's being worked on right now. And I believe DNRC is going to start having a series of public presentations of that map and comments on that map coming up in 2026.
Okay, that's great. That's really helpful. And this was a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Great. I'm glad you
Learned
found
a
that
lot.
helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. I think we'll call it a day here. Thanks everyone who's still on the call for coming. Thank you everyone else. We will post all the links and information with the recording, and we'll have that out here in the next few days. So
Thanks, Max. Thanks for hosting.
thanks. Bye.
Thanks, PCC. Bye, everyone. Thanks for